Ever wonder what happens to a human body inside a steel box when it gets hit by a projectile weighing 25 kilograms? Spoiler, you do not even need to penetrate the armor to find out. In the summer of 1943, German Tigers went on a turkey shoot against our tankers. They laughed as they picked us off from 2 kilometers away. They felt like gods of war. But they did not know that at that very moment, in the rear, amidst hell and soot, a monster was being born that would turn their divine machinery into scrap metal and their crews into mincemeat. How did Soviet engineers create a Judgment Day weapon in just 3 months? Why did a single hit blow the turrets off the vaunted King Tigers and cause their welds to burst like glass? And what grim surprise awaited the Germans in the basements of Berlin? Watch until the end to see how physics defeats arrogance and to learn the price paid to create the most terrifying hammer of the Second World War. Now, we are going to take Hitler's ultimate nightmare apart, piece by piece. A flash. The strike of a hammer on an anvil that ruptures eardrums. The screech of tearing metal, lasting a fraction of a second but feeling like an eternity. Then, silence. A dead, cotton-like silence, broken a moment later by the roar of flames and a scream that no longer sounds human. The smell of burnt rubber mixes with the sickly sweet scent of roasting meat. This is the sound of the summer of 1943. This is the sound of technical superiority cast in Krupp steel. This is not a newsreel. This is the physics of destruction, where the variables are the thickness of the armor plate and the kinetic energy of the shell. And in that equation, the Soviet tankers that summer were doomed to play the role of victims. The steppe near Kursk trembles from the heat haze. The horizon is choked with thick, black pillars of smoke. Every pillar is a crew. These are someone's sons, burned alive without ever seeing the enemy. The situation on the battlefield dictates a cruel arithmetic. German heavy machines open fire from distances of 1,500 or even 2,000 meters. For a Tiger gunner, these are firing range conditions. He sees the target through superb Zeiss optics. He feels safe behind a 100mm frontal plate. He is calm. His pulse is normal. He is just doing a job. Align the crosshairs, press the pedal. 88mm of death fly out of the barrel. A hit is guaranteed. Penetration is guaranteed. And what is on the other side of the sight? A Soviet T-34 with a 76mm cannon. To have even a theoretical chance of penetrating the Tiger's front, it needs to get within 400 or 500 meters. This is a knife fight. This is suicide. This is 1.5 kilometers under withering fire. 1.5 kilometers across the open steppe where you are exposed on the palm of a hand. The crews know this. Drivers squeeze the last juices out of the diesels, trying to close that cursed distance of death. But you cannot cheat physics. "Commander, the armor won't give! Ricochet! Another ricochet!" The scream in the headset breaks into a squeal. "Closer! Get closer, Mishka! Maneuver!" The commander's voice is hoarse from the fumes. "Come in from the flank!" "I don't see him. He's firing from the tree line. Where's he firing from?" Impact. The turret is torn from the ring along with the crew. The ammunition detonates instantly. It was a crisis. The cold, sticky breath of catastrophe. We are used to talking about heroism, but heroism is powerless against ballistics. When your shell just scratches German armor, leaving only gray marks, while the return shot turns your vehicle into a pile of scrap, morale breaks faster than steel. The battlefield turned into a shooting gallery. The German crews called it a rabbit hunt. They lined up on the dominant heights and methodically, as if on a conveyor belt, shot up the attacking Soviet wedges. 76mm shells bounced off the frontal armor of the German heavyweights like peas off a wall. Sparks. the screech of steel on steel, and absolutely no deformation inside the German tank. The German crew heard only dull thuds against the hull, which evoked not fear, but a malicious smirk. "Ivan is knocking at the door again," they joked. It was a sense of total, absolute impunity, a feeling more intoxicating than schnapps. In the headquarters, a gloomy tension reigned. Reports from the front landed on command tables in dry, terrifying lines. Losses are rising. Fire efficiency is 0. Tank armies are bleeding out, trying to overwhelm the enemy's technical perfection with numbers and fury. But steel knows no pity. Steel recognizes only strength, and the Red Army did not have that strength in the summer of 1943. "What do we do, Comrade General?" The colonel, who had just climbed out of a burning tank, wipes soot from his face with shaking hands. "We are targets to them, just targets. I put 3 solid slugs into his front, 3, and he just turned his turret and burned my wingman." "Hold on," the general throws out shortly, but his eyes hold the same emptiness. He understands. The order to hold on will not add millimeters of penetration. An answer was needed. Not a slogan, not a plea, not political will. An argument weighing dozens of tons was needed. A hammer was needed, capable of cracking this Teutonic nut with a single blow. In Moscow, in the highest offices, they finally realized the scale of the tragedy. The time for half measures had passed. Modernizing old guns was a dead end. A qualitative leap was required. A monster was needed that would devour the German menagerie. The deadline was yesterday. Joseph Cotten and his design bureau received a task that would make any engineer's hair stand on end. Create a machine capable of withstanding an 88mm strike and, most importantly, capable of answering in a way that left the Germans with no questions. 3 months for everything. 3 months to cover a path that takes years in peacetime. It was a race not for life, but against death. Literally. Every day of delay was paid for with hundreds of death notices. The designers understood. Out there on the front, boys are burning right now. While a schematic is being drawn, while a part is being turned, someone is dying in a steel box in the middle of the step. This understanding pressed on their shoulders heavier than a concrete slab. The question was blunt. What caliber? 85mm? Not enough. 100mm? Hard to manufacture. No base. And then eyes turned to core artillery. 122mm, the A-19 caliber. A gun accustomed to breaking concrete bunkers and crushing field fortifications. "Are you out of your minds?" the skeptics said. "That is a howitzer caliber. Separate loading, low rate of fire. Where will you shove that? In a tank turret? There is no room." "We will shove it in," answered the proponents of the brute force concept. "Because there is no other choice. We don't need to shoot often. We need to make sure that after the first hit, only memories remain of the tiger." The decision was made. It was a risk, a huge, unjustified risk by peacetime standards. To stuff a massive, heavy artillery system into a cramped, rotating turret. To force mechanisms to work at the limit of their durability. But there was no choice. Either we create a tank killer, or the enemy's tanks kill us all. In the workshops of Chelyabinsk, in this Tankograd, work boiled with a fury bordering on madness. People slept right by the machines, on boxes of shavings. Shifts lasted 18 hours. Women and children manned the milling machines because the men had gone to burn in that very step. The air in the workshops was blue with tobacco smoke and welding gases. There was no pathos here. There was heavy, dirty, masculine work. the work of creating an instrument of retribution. The engineers struggled with the breech assembly. The recoil of the 122mm gun was monstrous. It could simply tear the turret off the ring, destroy the suspension, maim the crew inside. A muzzle brake was needed. A new recoil system was needed. Every millimeter of space inside the fighting compartment was worth its weight in gold. "The breech hits the guard!
The loader has nowhere to turn!"
the lead engineer shouted, waving blueprints. "He won't be able to ram the shell." "Then change the breech design, cut the corners, reconfigure the ammo rack," Coton answered, not lifting his head from the table. "Think. You have tonight. Tomorrow this assembly must be in metal." In this atmosphere of a feverish race, to the accompaniment of pneumatic hammers and the hiss of welding, a new face of war was born. Rough, powerful, inevitable. It was no longer just a tank. It was a self-propelled carriage for a Judgment Day gun. The entire philosophy of the machine was built around the gun. Everything else, armor, engine, chassis, was merely a means to deliver this barrel to firing distance. They did not yet know what would happen. Would it work at all? But they knew one thing. What was happening at the front had to stop. Impunity had to be punished. And the instrument of this punishment would be a shell weighing 25 kilograms. 25 kilograms of TNT and steel, carrying death to Nazi machinery. While the designers drew lines on drafting paper, the last days of German dominance were burning out on the front. The era of the tiger and panther as absolute predators was coming to an end. Deep in the Ural Mountains, a real beast was waking up, and its roar was destined to drown out the victory marches of the Panzerwaffe. But for now, the smell of burning hung over the steppe, and the crews of the T-34s went to their deaths hoping only for a miracle. And that miracle was being forged right now in the smoke and soot of Chelyabinsk. Chelyabinsk does not sleep. In this city, the concept of night does not exist. There are only shifts: first, second, third. The sky over Tankograd is lit by the crimson glow of blast furnaces, like a reflection of the hell happening on the front thousands of kilometers away. Here, in the deep rear, a battle of its own is being fought. A battle not against German panzergrenadiers, but against the laws of physics, the resistance of materials, and inexorable time. Joseph Coton's design bureau became the operations headquarters, where the fate of the caliber was decided. The task was impossible. Take a field corps gun, the A-19, caliber 122 millimeters, and force it to work inside a cramped tank turret. It is like trying to mount a ship's mast on a fishing boat. The gun is enormous. It was created to fire from the ground, where the recoil is absorbed by trails digging into the earth. In a tank, there is no earth. In a tank, there is only the turret ring and fragile human bodies around the breech. Smoke hangs thick in the chief designer's office. On the tables are piles of drafting paper covered in calculations. The engineers do not speak. They growl, stabbing their fingers at the drawings. "Recoil is 900 millimeters!" The chief engineer slams his palm on the table. "Joseph Yakovlevich, it will smear the commander against the back wall of the turret. The breech takes up half the fighting compartment during recoil. Where do we put the crew? Seat them on the armor?" "Shorten the recoil." Coton does not look at the speaker. He looks at the muzzle brake schematic. "Install an active brake. Kill the energy at the exit." "That exposes the position. It'll kick up a cloud of dust on firing. The tank will be blinded." "Better to be blind for a second than dead from a German shell you can't penetrate. Do it." Thus, a compromise between power and the ability to use it was born. Engineers fought to reduce the recoil length. The solution came in the form of a muzzle brake, a massive attachment at the end of the barrel that redirected part of the powder gases to the sides, dampening the monstrous recoil energy. It was pure gas mechanics, the taming of an explosion. Without this device, the 122mm barrel would have simply ripped the turret out of the hull on the very first shot. Clanking reigns in the workshops. This is the sound of a monster's birth. Experimental plant number 100 is working in emergency mode. There are no beautiful computer-controlled machines here. There are rough milling cutters screeching as they bite into alloy steel. There are welding machines scattering cascades of sparks that burn through the workers' overalls. The workers are teenagers, women, old men. They stand on wooden boxes to reach the machine handles. Their faces are grey with fatigue, but their hands do the work with frightening precision. Assembly of the first D-25T gun went hard. The breech block, a massive slab of steel, refused to fit into place. The piston breech, a legacy of field artillery, was as reliable as a sledgehammer, but slow. Reloading it required muscular effort and time. Precious seconds.
It's moving hard, the foreman yells, leaning his whole weight on the lever. Jamming on the lock. Change the grease, the technologist screams back over the noise of the shop. Check the tolerances, shavings got in. They fitted the parts by hand, with files and scrapers. They polished surfaces to a mirror shine so the breech would move smoothly, like oil. It was jewelry work with parts weighing hundreds of kilograms. An error of a fraction of a millimeter meant the breech would jam in battle, and the tank would turn into a mass grave. Responsibility pressed on the back of the neck heavier than fatigue. The main problem was separate loading. The projectile separate, the casing with the charge separate. The projectile weighs 25 kilograms. The casing weighs just as much. In the cramped turret, the loader needs to grab this weight, turn around in a confined space, shove the projectile into the breech, use a rammer to push it into the rifling, then grab the casing, ram it, and close the breech. This is not just physical exertion. This is athletics on the brink of survival. "There's no room!" the test pilot swore, trying to simulate the loader's work in a wooden mock-up of the turret. "I'm hitting my elbows on the ammo rack." "You'll get used to it," the designer answered dryly. "The tank isn't for comfort. The tank is for killing. If you want to live, you'll twist yourself even worse than that." By the autumn of 1943, the first samples of the guns were ready. These were rough pieces of metal devoid of elegance, soaked in gun oil and the sweat of workers. The barrels looked up at the soot-stained ceiling of the workshop, as if threatening the sky itself. The muzzle brake gave the cannon a predatory, aggressive look. It was no longer a pipe. It was a tool. A tool capable of sending 25 kilograms of death to point-blank range with monstrous kinetic energy. Parallel work was underway on the hull. A cast frontal part, smooth contours designed to increase the probability of ricochet. Engineers conjured over the composition of the armor, adding nickel and molybdenum, trying to make it viscous and hard at the same time. The armor had to not just take a hit, it had to dampen the vibration from the impact so the crew inside would not get a concussion even without penetration. When the turret with the installed 122mm gun was first lowered onto the ring of the IS hull, the workers in the shop fell silent. The machine settled on its springs, accepting the weight of its main argument. It looked disproportionate. The enormous, long barrel seemed to outweigh the tank itself. It stuck out several meters forward, claiming rights to the space in front of it. "A beast," the old master said quietly, wiping his hands with a rag. "A real beast."
"A killer of beasts," the military representative corrected him. "If this thing shoots and doesn't fall apart, the Germans are finished." But there was no certainty. There was only hope and cold calculation. Calculation that the laws of ballistics would be on our side. The machine was rolled out of the workshop. Frosty air hit the armor heated by welding. The V2 diesel snarled, throwing out clouds of blue smoke. Clanking its wide tracks, the tank moved toward the railway platform. It walked heavily, confidently, pressing the frozen earth into mud. Its path lay to the proving ground, to the place where theory was to meet practice, to the place where metal had to prove its right to life by destroying other metal. The engineers followed it with their eyes. Many had shaking hands, not from the cold, but from nervous exhaustion. They had done everything they could. They had stuffed the unstuffable. They had forced a field howitzer to become a tank sniper. Now the word belonged to gunpowder and steel. Ahead was Kubinka, and a captured tiger that did not yet know its time had run out. Autumn 1943. The Kubinka Proving Ground near Moscow. The sky is covered with leaden clouds. A fine, prickly rain drizzles, turning the ground into viscous slush. But no one here cares about the weather. The air is electrified with the expectation of something terrible and grandiose. On the firing line stands it, a captured tiger. The pride of German engineering, the symbol of the Wehrmacht's invincibility. It was not brought here for a parade. It was brought for an execution. Opposite, at a distance that seems insane for a tank duel, the new Soviet heavyweight has frozen. The IS Joseph Stalin. For now, it is just a prototype. Object 240. It looks squat and mean. Its turret is turned toward the German machine, and the huge muzzle brake of the 122mm gun looks exactly at the tiger's forehead. Around them, military men in greatcoats with high collars and civilians in oil-stained, quilted jackets bustle. Marshal Voroshilov looks grimly through binoculars. Standing next to him is Joseph Kotin, pale from lack of sleep, but calm as a rock. "What is the distance?" the marshal asks abruptly, not lowering his binoculars. 2,000 meters, the proving ground commander answers. His voice trembles. 2,000? Voroshilov turns to Kotin. "Joseph, do you want to embarrass yourself?" At that distance, shells scatter. "We'll just waste ammunition. Move it closer." "No," Kotin says firmly. "We will shoot from here. This is his working distance." Inside the tank, the test crew works as a single mechanism. There is no room for emotion here, only calculation. The gunner presses his forehead against the sight pad. In the eyepiece, the German tank is just a small grey box. The sight mark overlaps the center of this box. Breath stops. The heart beats against the ribs, counting down the last seconds of the German metal's life. "Armor piercing. Ready?" The loader's voice sounds hollow, as if from a barrel. The breech clanks, locking 25 kilograms of death in the chamber. "Fire!" It was not just a shot. It was an earthquake in miniature. The muzzle brake worked like a jet engine, throwing monstrous sheaves of flame and gas to the sides. The multi-ton machine rocked back, pressing its tracks into the mud as if it had taken a sledgehammer blow to the forehead. The shockwave knocked the last autumn leaves off branches within a radius of 50 meters. The roar hit the ears of the observers, forcing many to instinctively duck. The shell left the barrel at a speed of 800 meters per second. 2 seconds of flight. 2 seconds of absolute silence, in which the fate of tank building was decided. On the other side of the proving ground, at the target, physics took its rights. The blunt-nosed, armor-piercing shell of 122mm caliber met the frontal armor of the Tiger. The German steel was magnificent, hard, viscous, tempered according to all Krupp standards. But working against it was not just the hardness of the Russian shell. Working against it was pure, inexorable kinetic energy. The impact was of such force that the laws of materials science stopped working as written in textbooks.
The steel was not penetrated, it was broken. The shell punched through the frontal plate, but the energy did not run dry there. A monstrous impulse of impact passed through the entire hull of the German tank. Observers with binoculars saw the Tiger shudder. It seemed to jump in place. And then, the impossible happened. The turret of the German tank, weighing tons, was torn from the ring. The hull welds, made by pedantic German welders, burst with a crack resembling rifle shots. The steel cracked like glass.
"Hit!" someone from the entourage yelled. "The turret! It blew the turret off!" They ran to the target across the muddy field, forgetting rank and title. Generals, designers, engineers. What they saw up close silenced them. This was not a hole. This was obliteration. A jagged gash in the frontal armor, the edges of which had melted from friction. Inside the tank, chaos. The engine torn from its mounts, bulkheads crushed like an accordion. Even without the ammunition detonating, the kinetic energy of the shell had turned the innards of the Tiger into a meat grinder. The crew, had they been inside, would have died instantly from barotrauma and fragments of their own armor. Coton walked up to the mangled machine. He ran his hand along the jagged edge of the metal. The metal was still hot.
"Well, Comrade Marshal?" he asked quietly. "Is the distance sufficient?" Voroshilov looked at the torn-off turret lying in the mud a meter from the hull. He took off his cap and wiped sweat from his forehead. "That is not a cannon, Joseph. That is a death sentence." It was a moment of truth. That day at the Kubinka Proving Ground, the myth of the invincibility of German tanks died. It became clear. No longer was there a need to aim for the driver's hatch or try to get around the flank. No more playing cat and mouse. 122 millimeters solved any problem. Even if the shell did not penetrate the armor, it would concuss the crew into unconsciousness. It would disable the transmission. It would destroy the observation devices. It was a knockout by sledgehammer. But the joy was restrained. Engineers were already climbing onto the armor of the IS with rulers and notepads. "The muzzle brake fell apart after the third shot," the military representative shouts, inspecting the gun. "Crack in the chamber. We'll redesign it." Coton is already writing something in a notebook. "We'll reinforce the structure, change the alloy. The main thing is the barrel holds the pressure." The firing continued until dark. They hit the sides. They hit concrete blocks with high explosive shells. The results were stunning. 25 kilograms of explosives and steel turned concrete fortifications into rubble. It became obvious. This machine was not just a tank destroyer. It was a universal breakthrough tool. An assault weapon capable of clearing a path for infantry through any obstacles. When the tired team returned to the barracks in the evening, the conversation was about only one thing. About the fact that now the Red Army has a long arm. A very heavy, steel arm. "The Germans don't know," the test gunner smirked, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "They still think 1.5 kilometers is their safety zone." "They'll find out soon," answered the driver. "It's going to be a surprise. A loud one." On that day at the proving ground, the death warrant for the Panzerwaffe was signed. The document was written not with ink on paper, but with holes in alloy steel. The caliber race was won. Now the hardest part remained: to produce these tanks, train the crews, and deliver this weighty argument to where it was waited for most. To the front. To where the crews of T-34s continued to burn, looking with hope to the east, waiting for when it would arrive. The answer of the hammer. February 1944, Ukraine. The Korsun-Shevchenkovsky area. The weather is an enemy to any equipment. Wet snow mixed with rain, fog that eats the outlines of objects at just 100 meters, mud so deep that a boot sinks into it up to the shin. The earth here is greasy, black, and now it is mixed with gasoline and blood. This is a cauldron, a giant meat grinder in which a Wehrmacht grouping is being ground down. German tank wedges try to break the ring of encirclement from the outside. Heavy tank battalions are in the vanguard, tigers and panthers, the elite. They are used to being masters of the situation. Their tactics have been honed for years. Take the high ground, set the distance to 2,000 meters, and methodically pick off Soviet tanks that simply cannot answer. This is not a battle. This is a shooting gallery. German commanders feel like operators of a complex but safe murder machine. Superb Zeiss optics allow them to see the target where a Russian gunner sees only a blurry spot. Inside the German Tiger, it is warm. The heater is working. The commander, an Oberleutnant, wipes the binocular eyepieces with a suede cloth. "Target's at 12 o'clock. His voice in the throat microphone is calm, even lazy. "Distance 2,200. Russians sitting in the field. Fools." "Are they 34s? The gunner asks, turning the guidance wheel. "What difference does it make?" the commander chuckles. "To us, they are just targets. Load armor piercing. We'll burn them now, and then have lunch." They do not know. They do not yet know that the rules of the game changed this winter. On the other side of the field, hidden by folds in the terrain and camouflage nets, stand new machines. Their silhouettes are lower and wider than usual. Long barrels with massive muzzle brakes look toward the German positions like pointing fingers of fate. A separate guards heavy tank regiment. IS-2s. Machines fresh from the factory. The factory grease has not even rubbed off the armor, but the crews are already angry. Angry from the cold, from fatigue, from the memory of 1941. Inside the IS, it is cramped. It smells of diesel fuel and wet wool. The loader, a sturdy guy with broad shoulders, holds a 25-kilogram shell on his knees. His hands are covered in oil, muscles tensed. He waits for the command. "Distance 2,000. The commander's voice in the headset sounds like grinding metal. "I see the lead vehicle, exposed his flank, arrogant." "Too far, comrade commander," the gunner doubts. "What if we miss?" "Belay the doubt. This isn't 76 millimeters. This is 122. Just hit the silhouette. Physics will do the rest." In the German sight, everything is calm. The crosshair is trained on the Soviet tank. The German gunner holds his breath, but he does not have time to fire. A flash on the Soviet side of the horizon is blindingly bright even through the fog. A second later, a sound reaches the German positions, a low, guttural roll of thunder that makes the ground tremble under the tracks. And a moment later, something happens that the German tankers have never seen. The shell hits the lead Tiger. It is not the ringing ricochet they are used to. It is a dull, squelching thud, as if a giant's fist slammed into a tin can. The kinetic energy of the impact is such that the 50-ton German machine is spun around in place. Inside the Tiger, hell arrives instantly. The armor does not hold. It bursts, shatters into pieces, turning into secondary fragments that shred the crew. The detonation of the ammunition rips off the turret. The multi-ton structure flies into the air, tumbling, and falls into the mud next to the hull. A pillar of flame soars into the sky. Silence hangs in the German battalion's radio waves for a second, and then it explodes with panic. "Where is the fire coming from?" someone screams on the air. "The distance is extreme. It's artillery." "No, it's tanks. I saw the flash. They are shooting from 2 kilometers." "Impossible.
The Russians don't have guns like that. Back! Everyone back! Second shot. Third. The Soviet heavyweights hit rarely, but frighteningly. The rate of fire is low, 1.5 to 2 minutes per shot. But every shell is a death sentence. The loader in the IS works like a damned man. A jerk, shell in the breech. A jerk, casing follows. The clank of the breech block. Ready? Fire! Another Tiger flares up like a matchbox. German optics, their vaunted advantage, become useless. What is the point of seeing the enemy if he kills you before you can effectively answer? The safety distance has vanished. It no longer exists. Chaos begins on the battlefield. The German formation breaks. Machines that a minute ago were attacking as if on parade begin to back up, colliding with each other. Tracks spin in the mud. Drivers yank levers, trying to get the tanks out of the kill zone. But the kill zone is now everywhere the 122mm shell reaches. "We're leaving! Hans, turn around!" The commander of the 2nd Tiger screams, watching his platoon leader's vehicle turn into a bonfire. "These aren't T-34s. These are some kind of monsters." "Track!" the driver wails. "We're stuck!" Impact. The shell hits the upper frontal plate. It does not penetrate the armor, but from the monstrous blow, the transmission inside the tank shears off. The crew suffers severe concussion. Blood runs from ears and noses. They are alive, but the battle is over for them. They are stunned, disoriented, and paralyzed with terror. It was a role reversal. The predator instantly turned into the prey. The psychological effect was stronger than the physical damage. German tankers, accustomed to believing in the invulnerability of Krupp's steel, suddenly realized their mortality. Their faith in technology was destroyed in one winter battle. Soviet tankers in their cramped, gas-filled machines felt it. They saw the enemy, previously haughty and brazen, begin to panic.
"They're running, the bastards!"
The loader wipes sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, leaving oily smears on his face. "Well, shall we send them another gift?" "Absolutely." The commander glued himself to the sight. "For Kursk. For 41. Load high explosive." The snow around turned black from soot. Burning German tanks smoked, melting the ice around them. The IS-2s stood like unshakable cliffs amidst this firestorm. Their armor withstood several hits. German shells, fired in panic, ricocheted off the cast turrets. That day near Korsun, the Wehrmacht learned a new lesson. The Russian tank no longer seeks to close the distance. The Russian tank hits from afar. And this strike cannot be parried. The thin, elegant rapier of German tactics broke against the heavy, rough, but inevitable sledgehammer of the Soviet caliber. The winter hunt had begun, and the game was now the Tigers. Summer, 1944. Operation Bagration. If in the winter near Korsun the Wehrmacht received a slap in the face, now a blacksmith's hammer awaited it with a full swing. These were no longer pinpoint pricks or duels of lone predators. This was an avalanche. Soviet industry, revved up to maximum RPM, spilled streams of steel onto the front. Trains with new heavy tanks went west in a continuous line, rumbling on the rail joints. Ural factories worked in 3 shifts, turning ore into instruments of retribution. And now this instrument was in the hands of an army that had learned how to use it. The Belarusian forests and swamps, which German generals considered impassable for heavy equipment, trembled. The roar of hundreds of diesels merged into one low, vibrating sound that blocked the ears. The IS-2s did not go by roads. They went where the enemy did not expect them, snapping century-old pines like matchsticks. Wide tracks churned the swampy mud. but the machines crawled forward, stubbornly and inevitably. It was a steamroller, a mechanism that has no reverse gear. The statistics of that summer were dry and merciless, like an accounting report in a morgue. For every lost IS-2, there were 3 or even 4 destroyed German machines. This was the mathematics of dominance. German 75mm anti-tank guns, recently formidable, now helplessly tapped slugs against the frontal armor of Soviet giants, leaving only scratches and chips. In response, a high-explosive shell weighing 25 kilograms would arrive, turning the gun crew into dust and the cannon into scrap metal. "I see a blockade! Anti-tank battery!" The commander's voice in the headset is calm. There is no fear, only businesslike anger. "Load fragmentation! Fragmentation up!" The loader, wet with sweat, drives the shell into the breach with a single fluid motion. He does not need to be reminded about the tempo. He feels the rhythm of the battle himself.
Shot! The shell explodes in the center of the German position. An explosion of such force that tree trunks around are sheared off like a razor. The earth flies into the air in a black fountain. Where a second ago there were German artillerymen, now there is only a crater and twisted iron. The tank does not even slow down. It passes through the smoke and fumes, clanking its tracks over the wreckage of the enemy gun. The crunch of metal under the treads sounds like music to the crew. Inside the tank, an atmosphere of cold fury reigns. These are no longer the boys who burned in 41. These are wolves. They know the price of life and the price of death. They remember the retreat, remember the bitterness of defeats, and now they are collecting debts. With interest. "Remember how they chased us near Minsk, Serega?" The driver shouts, shifting gears. The levers are stiff, but his arms are filled with strength. "I remember," responds the commander, pressed to the sight. "Now we pay them back for Minsk. And add for Brest." The German defense was bursting at the seams. Their tigers and panthers rushed about, trying to plug the holes, but there were too few of them, and they were no longer the masters. As soon as a German tank stuck its nose out of cover, a concentrated fire of a platoon of IS tanks rained down on it. 3 or 4 barrels of 122mm caliber fired in a volley. No one had a chance to survive under such a rain of steel. Even if the first shell ricocheted, the second and third broke the armor, tore off turrets, set fuel tanks on fire. The logistics of the offensive were monstrous. Tanks devoured fuel by the ton. Shells were spent by the trainload. But the supply machine worked. Tankers, black with soot and oil, refueled right on the move, passing jerry cans down the chain without killing the engines. Stopping was forbidden. Tempo. Tempo decided everything. The Germans were given not a second of respite. No chance to dig in. No opportunity to regroup. In the forests near Bobrusk, IS-2s came upon a German column trying to break out of the cauldron. It was not a battle. It was a beating. Soviet tanks simply crushed trucks and armored personnel carriers with their tracks, not wasting shells. A heavy machine weighing 46 tons turned everything that fell under its tracks into a flat pancake. Screams, shots, the roar of engines, everything mixed into one cacophony of destruction. "Save the shells!" the commander yells. "Crush them! Just crush them!" The driver just grins in the darkness of the fighting compartment. He feels the machine like his own body. Every jolt of the hull is transmitted to his spine. He feels no pity. Pity remained back in 41, in a burned village near Smolensk. Now there is only work. Dirty, heavy work of cleaning the land. Tank wedges sliced through the Belarusian earth,
leaving behind clearings of fallen trees and burning German equipment. Crews slept in snatches, right in the tanks, resting their heads on the gun breeches. They ate dried bread, washing it down with water from flasks that smelled of oil. But there was no fatigue. There was adrenaline. There was the intoxicating feeling of victory. The feeling when you are sitting inside the most powerful combat machine in the world, and no one can stop you. The Wehrmacht abandoned equipment in panic. Intact Tigers and Ferdinands stood on the roadsides with empty tanks. German logistics collapsed under the blows of Soviet aviation and tank breakthroughs. Soviet tankers drove past these abandoned giants without even turning their turrets. The defeated enemy did not interest them. They were interested in those who still resisted. Operation Bagration became a demonstration of what happens when engineering genius is combined with mass production and tactical mastery. The IS-2 became the symbol of that summer. Not a lone hero, but part of a huge steel pack, relentless as a force of nature. It was a march of retribution. The clank of tracks sounded like a funeral toll for Army Group Center. By the end of summer, when the tanks reached the borders of East Prussia, the appearance of the machines had changed. The armor was scratched by shrapnel, the paint burned off, the fenders torn off. But these were the scars of winners. The crews looked west with angry, cheerful eyes. They knew the worst was already behind them. They had broken the beast's spine. Now all that remained was to finish it off in its own lair. And they had the perfect tool for it. 122 millimeters of arguments against which Hitler had no remaining objections. Autumn, 1944. The Baltics. The war changed geometry. Spacious fields and copses, where one could maneuver and breathe deeply, were left behind. Now the horizon narrowed to the width of a city street. The IS-2, created for long-range duels in the steppes, crawled into the stone sack of European cities. Here, amidst Gothic architecture and narrow alleys, the 46-ton giant felt like an elephant in a china shop. But this elephant was in a rage, and he came not to buy dishes, but to tear down walls. Urban combat is claustrophobia raised to the absolute. For a tanker, it is hell. Visibility through the periscopes is minimal. Any window, any basement, any attic can hide death. The laws of long-range ballistics do not work here. The law of the sledgehammer works here. Distances shortened to ridiculous lengths, 50, 100 meters. At such range, it is impossible to miss, but it is also impossible to survive if the enemy shoots first. Infantry presses against the armor. Grimy, tired infantrymen in dusty tunics look at the tank like an icon. For them, this steel mountain is the only chance to get through the next street and stay alive. "Commander!" An infantry lieutenant knocks on the armor with the butt of his submachine gun, shouting over the rattle of machine guns. "Corner house, 3rd floor. Machine gun won't let us lift our heads. And there's something heavy sitting in the basement, pounding from an embrasure." "Copy that, infantry." The tank commander's voice is hollow, calm. He does not see the soldiers' faces. He sees only targets. "Stand back. We're going to do some renovations." The turret of the IS begins to rotate slowly. The barrel, almost 6 meters long, catches a shop sign, ripping it from its mountings. Plaster rains down on the armor. In the tightness of city streets, turning the gun is a whole special operation. The driver works the levers with jewelry precision, turning the hull to give the gunner a firing sector. "High explosive!" The command is short, like a gunshot. The loader is already holding the shell. 25 kilograms. OF 471. Inside this steel pig is almost 4 kilograms of TNT. This is not an armor-piercing needle. This is pure energy of destruction.
In the cramped turret, where every centimeter counts, the loader performs a complex dance with heavy metal. Ram the shell, ram the casing, close the breach. Ready! The target in the sight is an ordinary residential window, blocked with sandbags. Flashes of a German MG-42 machine gun erupt from there. The gunner does not aim for the machine gunner. That is pointless. He aims the crosshairs at the wall between the windows, at the load-bearing structure of the building. The task is not to kill the shooter. The task is to destroy his cover. A shot in the city sounds different than in the field. The sound wave, reflecting off the walls of houses, hits the ears with doubled force. Windows in neighboring buildings fly out instantly, showering the pavement with a rain of shards. The shell slams into the brickwork. The fuse is set for high explosive action, with a delay. The slug punches through the wall, flies inside the room, and only there, in the depths, detonates. The result is monstrous. The facade of the building swells like a bubble and collapses downward in a waterfall of brick and concrete. Dust instantly clogs the entire street. Visibility drops to zero. When the dust settles a bit, it becomes clear that the machine gun nest is gone. Neither is the corner of the house. There is only a pile of smoking ruins from under which no sound comes. The tank acted as an architect of ruins, instantly replanning the urban landscape. "Clear!" wheezes the commander. "Driver, forward! To the next intersection!" The infantry gets up and runs forward, jumping over broken bricks. They follow the tank, hiding behind its stern. The tank is their shield and their sword. In these battles, the IS-2 revealed itself from a new, unexpected side. It was the ideal assault tool. Its 122mm shell possessed such kinetic energy and explosive effect that it did not matter what it hit: a tank, a concrete pillbox, or a brick house. The effect was the same: destruction. German fortifications that could have held up the advance for weeks vanished after 1 or 2 shots. "Pillbox on the right! Concrete dome!" shouts the gunner. A German firing point, poured in concrete, snaps back with fire. 45mm shells would bounce off it like peas. But the IS does not waste time looking for vulnerable spots. "Armor piercing! In the embrasure!" Impact. The concrete splits. The heavy, blunt-nosed shell does not just pierce the wall. It transfers the impact energy to the entire structure. Concrete crumbles. Rebar snaps. The dome of the pillbox slides to the side like a knocked-off hat. Inside, silence. Concussion from such a hit is incompatible with life, even if not a single fragment touched the garrison. Inside the tank, the crew works at the limit. Ventilation cannot cope with the powder gases. Eyes sting, a sour taste of burnt gunpowder in the mouth. The throat is parched. "Water!" wheezes the loader, driving another shell home. "No water," answers the commander. "Drink later. Work." Urban battles dictated their cruel rules. The tank was blind. The infantry were its eyes. It was a symbiosis of metal and flesh. Without infantry, a tank in the city is a corpse, burned by Faustniks from an alleyway. Without a tank, infantry is meat for machine guns. They learned to interact on the level of instincts. A hand gesture, a knock on the armor, a tracer burst toward the target, and a second later, 25 kilograms of death arrives there. Sometimes they had to shoot through walls. The IS-2 smashed through fences, crushed barricades with the weight of its hull. The sound of breaking stone and the screech of metal on concrete became the constant background of the offensive. Tankers stopped fearing walls. They realized, for the 122mm caliber, obstacles do not exist. There are only targets. "Hans is dug in the basement of the department store," a scout reports, climbing onto the armor. "The wall there is 1.5 meters thick." 1.5 meters, the commander chuckles, wiping soot from his face. Means we'll put 2 shells in the same spot. And they did. The sniper accuracy of the heavy gun allowed them to plant the second shell exactly into the crater of the first. The first cracked the bark, the second exploded inside. The building folded into itself, burying the garrison under tons of debris. This was not a war of maneuver. This was a war of shelter destruction. Methodical, dirty, dusty work. By the end of the day, the street turned into a gray tunnel, cluttered with the refuse of war. The IS tanks stood by the captured square, their barrels smoking, the paint on the muzzle brakes burned down to the metal. The crews climbed out, staggering from fatigue and fumes. Faces black, only the whites of eyes and teeth visible. They looked at the work of their hands, at the breaches in walls, at the collapsed floors, at the silence they brought to this block. They did not feel like heroes. They felt like the day laborers of war who were given the heaviest sledgehammer in the world and ordered to demolish the old, rotten world to its foundation. And they coped with this task perfectly. The Baltic operation showed, you cannot hide from the IS-2 hammer behind any wall. Stone crumbles, concrete cracks, and the enemy's will to resist breaks along with their shelters. The tank ceased to be just a fighter of its own kind. It became the absolute assault weapon, a key that opens any doors, even if those doors were welded shut. Autumn, 1944. Poland. The Sandomierz bridgehead. The ground here is soaked in dampness and the expectation of the finale. It seemed the spine of the Panzerwaffe was already broken, and only one dash remained to Berlin. But the German military genius, cornered, snapped back with a final, monstrous argument. Out onto the battlefield crawled them. King Tigers. Tiger II. This was the pinnacle of German technical megalomania. 68 tons of alloy steel, frontal armor at rational slope angles, like a Panther, but 150 millimeters thick. A gun 71 calibers long, capable of stitching through any armor at line of sight distance. This was not a tank. It was a mobile pillbox created to stop time and turn history back. The first encounter with this monster was an icy shower for Soviet crews. The usual scheme, saw, fired, destroyed, which worked with the first Tigers, failed. Armor piercing, in the front! The usual command. Shot. Roar. In the sight, it is visible how the 122mm shell strikes the upper frontal plate of the German giant. A shower of sparks, the screech of a ricochet going into the sky. On the German's armor, only a deep gouge. The tank continues to crawl, slowly turning its turret toward the offender. "It won't take it!" The gunner's shout is full of angry amazement. "Went into ricochet! The angle is too sharp!" "Back! Driver, back into the fold!" The commander instantly assesses the situation. In frontal projection, the King Tiger was almost invulnerable. To penetrate it from the front required getting to a mortally dangerous distance of 500 meters, and even then, success was not guaranteed. German engineers triumphed. They had created a shield that withstood the blow of the Russian hammer. But they forgot one detail. Tank combat is not a jousting tournament where lances strike lance. Tank combat is a hunt. The battle of tactics began. Soviet aces quickly understood, competing with this mountain of metal in a head-on shootout is suicide. The IS-2 weighed 46 tons, the King Tiger almost 70. This difference in weight became the sentence for the German. On the soft ground of the Polish autumn, the German mastodons got bogged down. Their engines, working at the limit, howled, choking on the overload. The turret rotation was slow. Hydraulics could not cope with the inertia of the heavy gun. "He's heavy, Sarega! Look how he crawls!" The IS commander glued his eyes to the periscope. "He's clumsy as a barge." "I see. Go left. Cut the angle. We'll flank him. By the time he turns the turret, we'll be in his liver." The V2 diesel roared, spewing clouds of black smoke. The IS-2, clanking tracks, tore from its place. This was tank boxing. Heavyweight against heavyweight, but one of them bet on total defense, and the second on striking power and maneuver. The Soviet tank used the folds of the terrain, copses, creek beds. It disappeared from the German gunner's field of view to appear where it was not expected, from the side. The side of the King Tiger is 80 millimeters, vertical plate, no slope. For the D-25T gun, this is not armor. This is cardboard. Distance 800 meters. The IS-2 pops out from behind a hill. The German tank begins to turn, tracks tearing the sod, but the hull rotates agonizingly slowly. The long barrel of the .88 caliber is still searching for the target, while the Soviet gunner has already aligned the sight angle with the flat side of the German turret. "Side! Hit under the turret!" Breath, heartbeat, pressing the trigger. A shell weighing 25 kilograms crashes into the German steel at a 90-degree angle. No ricochets. The kinetic energy does not go into a slide. It all, to the last joule, goes into destruction. The armor is not just penetrated, it is broken out. A huge chunk of steel is pressed inside the fighting compartment, acting as a secondary projectile. The ammo rack, located in the niches of the turret bustle, detonates instantly. An explosion of monstrous force tears off the turret of the King Tiger. The 68-ton behemoth turns into a bonfire. Inside the IS, there is a hum from the shot. The casing falls with a ring onto the floor of the fighting compartment. Blue smoke hangs in the air. "Got him!" exhales the gunner, wiping sweat from his forehead right with his helmet. "Cracked the bastard!" "And you were scared," the commander grins, though his own hands are shaking. "Kings are mortal too. The main thing is knowing where to hit. Find the next one." In these battles in the autumn of '44, the period was placed in the argument of armor and projectile. The Germans created a perfect fortress, but Soviet tankers found the key to it. That key was maneuver. The IS-2 was not a perfect tank. It was cramped, it had a low rate of fire, an ammo load of only 28 shells. But in the hands of an experienced crew, it became an instrument for the surgical removal of German equipment. The victory over the King Tigers had colossal psychological significance. German tankers, who believed in the invulnerability of their new wonder weapon, again experienced shock. Their armor, their thick hides, their technical perfection turned out to be powerless before the cunning and cruel Russian hunter armed with a naval caliber. On the fields near Sandomierz, the carcasses of the Wehrmacht's most powerful tanks smoked. Twisted metal, torn-off turrets, hulls burst from internal explosions. This was a graveyard of German hopes. Soviet tanks went past them to the west. Ahead, the border of the Reich already loomed. The landscape changed. Fields gave way to dense buildings, concrete autobahns, and finally, fortified regions the Germans called impregnable. There, ahead, the most terrible exam awaited them. Not tank duels in the open, but a dogfight in concrete and brick. The Zelo Heights and the streets of Berlin, where the combat distance would shorten to a grenade throw and the enemy would sit in every crack with a Panzerfaust.
The IS-2 had to change the role of hunter to the role of a battering ram. A steel ram destined to smash the last gates of the Nazi citadel. April 1945, Zalo Heights. This is no longer a war of maneuver. This is a war of frontal impact. Before the tank wedges is not just a fortified line, but a layer cake of concrete, steel, and desperation. The Germans understand. Behind their backs is Berlin. Nowhere to retreat. The density of fire here is such that the air seems to consist of lead and shrapnel more than oxygen. IS-2s go into the attack like icebreakers in ice. Tracks tear the earth, plowed by thousands of craters. There is nowhere to hide here. Folds in the terrain are swept by crossfire. Tanks crawl up the slope, engines roaring at maximum RPM. Armor rings from small-caliber hits like a bell. Shell fragments knock off external equipment, tear spare parts boxes, shear off antennas. But the 46-ton machines do not stop. They fulfill the role of a ram. Their task is to take the main blow, crack the defense open like a tin can, and let the lighter and faster T-34s through the breach. "Left! Turn left!" The commander's voice in the intercom drowns in the roar of explosions outside. "I see flashes! Pillbox on the crest!" "Distance 600!" yells the gunner. "Fire!" The barrel belches flame. A shell weighing 25 kilograms goes to the target. On the top of the hill, a fiery flower blooms. Logs and soil fly dozens of meters up. The machine gun point falls silent forever. But the worst begins later. When the heights are taken and the tank armies are drawn into the suburbs of Berlin, the landscape changes instantly. Wide fields are replaced by stone canyons of streets. For a heavy tank, this is a trap. The long barrel of the D-25T gun becomes a problem here. It is hard to turn in a narrow alley. It catches walls, lampposts. The sector of fire narrows to a narrow corridor ahead. Berlin is turned into a fortress. Every window is an embrasure. Every basement is a bunker. Every pile of trash can hide death. And this death has a name. Panzerfaust. A cheap tube with a shaped charge grenade. A weapon of desperation distributed to everyone, from old men of the Volkssturm to boys of the Hitler Youth. For the IS-2, this is the main threat. Its thick armor, calculated for the blows of kinetic slugs, is powerless before a jet of molten copper burning through steel like butter. "Faustnick!
Right, second floor!"
The scream of a paratrooper on the armor breaks into a squeal. Too late. The characteristic hissing sound of a launch. Impact on the side. The cumulative jet burns through 80 millimeters of armor in a fraction of a second. Inside the fighting compartment, hell flares up. The temperature jumps to hundreds of degrees. Splashes of molten metal shred faces, set oily clothes on fire. If the jet hits the casings with gunpowder, the crew is doomed. The turret tears off the ring, and the heavy machine turns into a mass grave. Losses rise. Tanks burn at intersections, blocking the way for the living. But the avalanche does not stop. Crews transfer to new machines and go into battle again. Tactics change on the fly. Now the IS-2 does not go alone. It goes in a bundle with assault groups. Infantry clears floors. Submachine gunners cut down Faustniks before they have time to shoot. And the tank? The tank works as a surgeon, amputating entire entryways. "In that house, third floor, corner window. See it?" "I see it. Take it apart." The 122mm high explosive slams into the facade of the residential building. The explosion takes out the outer wall. Rooms with furniture, pictures on the walls, and a machine gun crew collapse downward in a cloud of dust. The tankers do not see people. They see firing points. There is no pity. There is only the mechanics of fire suppression. If the enemy does not surrender, he is buried under the rubble of his own shelter. The streets of Berlin are clogged with barricades. Trams filled with stones, rails dug into the asphalt, concrete blocks. The Germans thought this would stop Soviet tanks. Naive. The IS-2 approaches the barricade. Distance, 50 meters. Armor piercing, at the base. Impact. The shell, possessing the energy of a speeding train, slams into the structure. The tramcar is torn apart. Wheel sets fly off like toys. Concrete blocks crumble into gravel.
Driver, ram it! The 46-ton carcass slams into the remains of the barrier at speed. The screech of metal on metal is such that it sets teeth on edge. The engine howls, throwing out clouds of black smoke. Tracks spark against the asphalt, but the machine crawls forward, pushing apart and crushing the obstacle. The way is open. Inside the tank is a gas chamber. Fans cannot cope. The air is thick with powder gases, dust and fumes. The crew works in a semi-fainting state. Faces are grey, eyes red. Water in canteens is hot and tastes of iron. The loader, a big man, can barely stand on his feet. The 25 kilograms of the shell now seem to weigh a ton. "Come on, Vanya, come on! Just a little more!" wheezes the commander, barely moving his tongue himself. "The Reichstag is close!" They do not see the Reichstag. They see only the next intersection covered in smoke. They see only flashes of shots from alleyways. Berlin is burning. Burning so that at night it is bright as day, and during the day it is dark from smoke, like twilight. The sun is a dim red disk through the soot. The battle is for every meter, for every house. Often it happens like this. The first floor is ours, the second, Germans, the third, ours again. A battle in a layer cake. The tank in such a situation shoots point blank, straight into the windows of the first floor. The shell pierces the building through and through, taking out partitions. The building settles. "Behind! Panther from the alley!" A scream on the air. A German tank, hidden in the ruins, tries to hit the rear. No time to turn the turret. "Driver, pivot turn!" The IS-2, roaring, spins on one track, breaking the curbstone. The German shoots. Ricochet! The shell grazes the cast cheek of the turret, leaving a deep furrow. The Soviet tank answers instantly. From such a distance, it is impossible to miss. The explosion of the German machine is of such force that tiles are ripped off neighboring houses. This is no longer tactics. This is rage. The rage of metal. Tanks go over corpses, over debris, over burning asphalt. No mercy, no prisoners. Only forward. To the center of this cursed city, to where the spider sits. Crews know. Many of them will not live until evening. The statistics of urban combat are ruthless. The survivability of a tank in a street fight is measured in minutes. But there is no fear. There is fatalism and anger. Anger for the long 4 years of the journey to this city, for destroyed homes, for fallen friends. "Load!" screams the commander, seeing ahead the grey bulk of a building from which anti-aircraft guns, lowered for direct fire, are shooting. "Ready! Take this, fascist! A delivery!" Shot, and again reloading. Heavy breathing, the clank of the breech. This rhythm does not break for a second. The IS-2, like a huge steel hammer, methodically, blow after blow, drives nails into the lid of the Third Reich's coffin. Berlin shudders from the blows, concrete crumbles, and through the dust and fire, the outlines of victory emerge. But one still needs to drive to it. through fire, through death, through this endless stone labyrinth. Combat is rhythm. For crews of medium T-34 tanks, this rhythm is like a machine gun burst. Shot, breech clank, casing ring, new shell, shot. 5, 6, sometimes 8 shots a minute. This is excitement. This is speed. This is a hail of steel slugs. Inside the heavy IS-2, time flows differently. Here the rhythm is like the blows of a hydraulic hammer in a forge. Slow, heavy, with all strength. But if the blow hits the mark, a second blow is no longer required. The most terrible enemy of the IS-2 crew is the stopwatch in the commander's head. The rate of fire of the D-25 T-gun is the machine's Achilles heel. 2. Maximum 3 shots a minute. And that is provided the loader is an athlete who hasn't winded yet and the tank isn't jumping over bumps. In the tight 20 to 30 seconds between shots fits an eternity. During this time, a German Panther, possessing a rapid-fire gun, manages to fire 3 shells. 3 chances to kill you, while you prepare your single answer. "Empty!" shouts the gunner after the shot. The breech opens with a heavy sigh, ejecting a cloud of acrid smoke. Now everything depends on one person, the loader. In this battle, he is the engine of the gun. He has no armor, but the life of the entire crew depends on his muscles. Separate loading is the price paid for power. Shell separate, charge in casing separate. A single unitary cartridge of such caliber would be too long and heavy. It would be impossible to maneuver in the cramped turret. The loader dives to the ammo rack. The shell weighs 25 kilograms. This is not just weight. It is an oily, smooth steel slug that strives to slip out of sweaty hands. The tank jerks, going over broken brick. Keeping balance with such a load is a task for a circus acrobat, not a soldier. But he holds it. "Shell!" he wheezes, driving the head part into the breech. Sound of metal on metal. A dull, heavy thud. Now the rammer is needed, a special wooden or metal stick to push the shell deep into the barrel rifling. If not rammed home, the breech won't close or a misfire will occur. A jerk of the hand. The shell goes deep into the barrel. But that is only half the job. Now the casing. A brass cup with gunpowder. It is lighter, but it is bulky. The loader grabs the casing, rams it after the shell. Casing! The clank of the wedge breech block. This sound is the most desired for the crew. It means the tank has become a weapon again, not just a target. Ready! This scream drowns in the noise of battle, but the commander hears it not even with ears, but with skin. The entire philosophy of combat on the IS-2 is built around the concept of one guaranteed hit. We have no right to ranging shots. We have no right to bracketing. Every miss is half a minute of defenselessness. Half a minute when the enemy sees you and you cannot answer. This forces the gunner to work with surgical precision, and the commander with icy calculation. Don't rush! The commander puts a hand on the gunner's shoulder, though the latter doesn't see him. Calm your breathing. Shoot for shore. In the sight, the German tank maneuvers. It knows the Russian heavy is reloading. It tries to use this time to close the distance or get off the line of fire. It is a game of nerves. Who flinches first? The gunner, who shoots prematurely and misses, or the German, who risks exposing himself to a blow for the sake of a favorable position. But when the shot happens, all questions are removed. This is where the essence of the 122mm caliber lies. German 75mm guns work like hole punches. They punch through armor, kill the crew with fragments, damage components, but the tank often remains repairable. The IS-2 works differently. It does not make holes. It destroys the structure of matter.
The kinetic energy of the 25-kilogram shell is such that a hit, even without penetration, causes a bell effect. The armor shudders with such frequency that welds burst and bolts inside the tank turn into shrapnel, killing its own crew. And if penetration occurs, the internal space of the enemy machine instantly fills with overpressure. Hatches are torn off hinges. A turret weighing 10 tons can be thrown into the air. Fuel and ammunition detonate from the monstrous concussion. We do not shoot often. We do not need to. One IS-2 shot is equal in destructive power to a volley of an entire battery of medium tanks. This is a weapon of the finale, a weapon of the period. After a hit by a 122mm shell, there are no wounded machines. There are only destroyed ones. "Target in sight! Panther, side!" "Shortstop," commands the commander. Shooting on the move from such a gun is a waste of ammo. The tank freezes for a second, dampening the sway. "Shot!" Heavy recoil of the barrel. The tank shudders with its whole hull, like a beast that has pounced on prey. And immediately, without a pause, a new cycle of the loader's back-breaking work begins. "Casing! Damn it, the casing is jammed!" he shouts, trying to tear the hot brass from the extractor. "Hot!" Hands in burns. Gloves have long been soaked in oil and are slipping. He tears the casing toward himself, skinning his fingers. It falls to the floor with a ring. Smoke eats the eyes. The fan overhead hums, but there is little use from it. "Shell! Give me the shell!" the commander urges. Time is running out. Seconds drip like blood. By the 10th shot, the loader is in a groggy state. His back won't straighten, arms are filled with lead, noise in the head. Throwing around 250 kilograms of iron in a cramped, rocking box, in smoke and fumes, this is work beyond human capabilities. But he continues, because he knows, as long as the gun shoots, they are alive. Technical imperfection? Perhaps. Western analysts will later write that separate loading was a mistake, that the rate of fire was too low. But they will write this sitting in comfortable offices. And here, on the streets of burning Berlin, IS-2 crews knew a different truth. The truth of one blow. They did not give a damn about the rate of fire when they saw how a whole span of a concrete building collapsed from one of their hits, burying machine gun nests under it. They did not give a damn about the heaviness of the shell when they saw the gun mantlet tear off a King Tiger along with the cannon. It was a philosophy of brute, absolute force. We do not compete in fencing. We strike with a club. Once. To death. And this philosophy worked flawlessly. The enemy could be faster, cunninger, more technical, but there is no defense against a crowbar if that crowbar weighs 25 kilograms and flies at a speed of 800 meters per second. "Ready!" the loader wheezes for the 100th time in the war, and the breech clanks again, locking death in the steel chamber, ready to break out and put a period in yet another German fate. May 1945. Silence. It is the strangest sound in the last 4 years. No roar of explosions, no screech of shrapnel, no strained roar of engines. Berlin lies in ruins, shrouded in smoke that slowly settles on the cobblestones. In this silence, one can only hear metal cooling down. The clicks of cooling armor, the crackling of red-hot barrels. The giants are falling asleep. Crews climb out of hatches. They take off their helmets, exposing their faces to the spring wind, which still smells of burning. They look at their machines. IS-2s stand in the middle of the defeated city, like cliffs against which the wave of Nazi fanaticism shattered. The paint on the turrets is burned off, fenders crumpled or torn off. On the armor, scars from ricochets, black scorch marks from Panzerfausts. But they are intact. They made it. They stand in the center of Europe, asserting the winner's right with their 46-ton weight. The main result of this war cannot be measured only in kilometers of traveled path or in the quantity of destroyed equipment. The main result is in the heads. The IS-2 did what political officers and fiery speeches could not do. It cured the army of tiger phobia. In 43, the word tiger caused a cold feeling in the stomach. It was a synonym for death, invulnerability, technical superiority before which we were powerless. Tankers felt like victims.
The IS-2 flipped this psychological board. When you hold a club of 122 millimeters caliber in your hands, you stop being afraid. You start seeking an encounter. Fear was replaced by the hunter's excitement. The Soviet tanker stopped feeling like a target. He sat in the operator's chair of a death machine that dictated its terms on the battlefield. This return of confidence was worth more than thousands of tons of gold. We finished the war not with the feeling of miracle survivors, but with the feeling of masters of the situation. In this confrontation of two schools of tank building, German and Soviet, victory was won by a rough but honest philosophy. The Germans bet on jewel-like complexity. Their King Tigers were masterpieces of engineering. Complex transmission, interleaved suspension, electric drives, precise optics. These were mechanisms created for laboratory conditions. The war ground down their complexity.
The suspension got clogged with mud. The transmission broke under the weight of the armor. The lack of alloying additives made the armor brittle. Our answer was different. The IS-2 was simple as an axe. Rough casting of the turret, on which mold marks are visible. Welds a finger thick, made by teenagers in Ural factories. Lack of comfort, heavy controls. But this axe worked always. In mud, in snow, in the dust of city combat. It did not need sterile conditions. It needed only diesel fuel and shells. Simplicity and mass production defeated elitist complexity. While the Germans assembled one Tiger, fitting parts by hand, Soviet assembly lines spat out a dozen IS tanks. It was a victory of industrial logic. Better to have a good and reliable weapon here and now than a perfect one, never. The IS-2 was not a perfect tank. It had a bunch of teething problems, but it was the perfect tank for this specific war. A breakthrough tank. A tank of one blow. Years will pass. These machines will take their places on pedestals, in parks, on the squares of cities they liberated and cities that created them. They will freeze in metal, lifting their barrels to the sky. Approach such a monument today. Do not look at it like a picture. Walk up close. Put your hand on the frontal plate. Feel it? Cold, rough metal. Bumpy swells of casting. This is not a decoration. This is the real skin of war. Look at the turret. It is cramped. Imagine what it is like to sit inside this steel box as a foursome when it is +30 outside, and inside, +50 from the running engine and red-hot breech. Imagine the smell, a mixture of diesel, gunpowder, sweat, and blood. This smell ate into the skin so that it was impossible to wash off for weeks. Look at the muzzle brake, that massive attachment at the end of the barrel. It was through it that the very firestorm erupted that blew turrets off Panthers and turned concrete pillboxes into rubble. This is not just a monument. This is a slumbering predator, an old veteran who did his heavy, dirty work and retired. On his armor is the entire history of that terrible path from Kursk to Berlin. Every chip of paint is a memory of a ricochet that could have been fatal, but wasn't. We often speak of victory in high words, of the feat of the spirit, of sacred sacrifice. All this is true, but victory also had a material foundation. It was forged not only in hearts, but also in open hearth furnaces. It had weight, caliber, and initial shell velocity. The IS-2 is the material embodiment of our rage. It was the answer. The hammer's answer to the challenge of the sword. Nazi Germany came to us with a sword, honed, sharp, and shiny. We met this sword with a sledgehammer, a heavy, unliftable, rough sledgehammer. And when these two metals met, the sword broke. History does not tolerate the subjunctive mood, but the fact remains. Without this machine, without these 122 millimeters, without these guys hauling 25-kilogram slugs in smoky turrets, the price of victory would have been even more terrible. Today they are silent. Their engines are silenced forever. Their guns are welded shut. Children climb on their armor, not understanding that under their feet is the deadliest machine of the mid-20th century. And that is probably right. Tanks should be silent. But we must remember how they sounded. We must remember this low, guttural growl of the diesel, the clank of tracks that made the earth tremble, and that very blow from which German steel cracked. It was not magic. It was physics. It was engineering. It was labor. The labor of designers, welders, turners, and the labor of crews, the workers of war who took this tool in their hands and broke the spine of the most terrible beast in human history. IS-2, the tank of victory. An argument to which no objections were found. A hammer that drove the last nail into the lid of fascism's coffin.